Welcome to the Innovators and Investors Podcast. I'm Kristian Marquez, founder and CEO of Finstrat Management. At Finstrat, we provide CFO-led accounting, finance, and reporting services to assist clients monetize their business. Stick around to the end of the podcast and I'll share how you can be our next guest. Now on to the show. Welcome to another episode of the Innovators and Investors Podcast. I'm your host, Kristian Marquez, founder and CEO of Finstrat Management. Really excited because today we have with us Yeri Lopez, Director of Partnerships at J2 Ventures. Yeri, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Kristian. I'm really happy to be here.
So why don't we get started with J2 Ventures? Would love to hear the firm's investment thesis.
Yeah, absolutely. So J2 it's going to be a bit of a mouthful. It's a deep tech, dual purpose, early stage investment fund. So what do all those words mean? It means that we look at technologies that have applications in the national security space, but unlike I think a lot of other dual tech, dual purpose investment funds, we tend to place the emphasis on companies that have large commercial TAMs and large commercial opportunities, looking for those companies that we can then bring in using our former government hats on into the national security space, typically DoD or intelligence communities, for applications against national security priorities. The underlying premise there is twofold. One, that we believe there's never been a transformative technology in the United States that has not touched or had not been the recipient of the defense funding or some sort of large federal funding. If you go back all the way to the beginnings of Silicon Valley with Fairchild Semiconductor, progressing on to today, it's always been some sort of application of non-dilutive capital or contracting services that has really underpinned the explosive growth. And two, that the world is safer, I think, when you have large commercial companies that are headquartered in the United States. So where do we want the next Google to be created? Well, we definitely don't want it to be created in an adversary. We want it to be created here. And so if you go after those and you foster those, not only does it lead to larger and better rewards as a venture capitalist, but also, I think, a safer country.
And your role inside J2?
Yeah, that's great. So my role is Director of Partnerships. And so what does that mean? It means that I do a lot of investment work, but I also do a lot of outreach. And so we see our role as investors as being highly selective. The way that you can afford to be highly selective is by, number one, hitting very large home runs, but then also maintaining a large stable of relationships. And so that is to federal government, state government, universities, other VCs, LPs, you name it. If there's someone to be partnered with, that's my game.
Got it. So we're going to dovetail then some of your experience with J2, but any J2 portfolio companies that are top of mind that we can share with our listeners to get a sense as to how the thesis comes to life?
Yeah, absolutely. One company that is I'll give you two companies. How does that sound? 2 for 1 deal. On the one end, I think that is very clear, is a company called Oura Rings. So it's a company that you can go out and you can purchase any of the rings at Best Buy. It is a health monitoring device that allows you to basically take telemetry of your own body, respiration rates, heart rates, temperatures, all the rest of that. We invested very early on and then connected them to the Air Force during COVID and received some non-dilutive capital to experiment to see if the ring could help detect COVID symptoms prior to onset. And so in a way to preserve the health of Air Force personnel. The company has since really taken off. I think they just raised the latest round at, I think, around a $5 billion valuation. And they have enormous commercial success. The company also received a smaller contract, I think of around 100 million, to provide additional rings to military personnel. And you can see how there's a very large commercial TAM there for a consumer product that still has defense applications in terms of maintaining health and awareness of the well-being of our soldiers. But the main focus was not the DoD, right? It wasn't this company that was only selling a health device targeting only DoD personnel, but rather a larger one that DoD could then participate in. The non-dilutive aspects of the capital helped to encourage that relationship. It helped the growth and the establishment of a US subsidiary, but really it was the commercial side taking off and really carrying the weight that allowed the benefits to accrue to both sides. The next one, Next one is a company called Illyria. So what does Illyria do? It provides timing and networking for free space optics. Essentially is looking to recreate the fiber optic network that happens to underpin all internet communications, but through space, using a piece of technology called free space optics, right? So essentially lasers. If you take fiber optic cable, you splice it in half and you maintained them at perfect alignment, the light that emitted from one end would be received at the other end, and you'd still be able to communicate. That's essentially all it is. But if you do this with satellites spinning around the Earth, it becomes very complicated very quickly. This was a Google spin out, their Google X program, and they learned very quickly how to apply advanced mathematics in order to maintain this network throughout space and then back down to terrestrial. It has a number of applications in DoD space because free space is very hard to detect, so it's quiet, but it can provide a tremendous amount of throughput at low latency for high speed internet. And it's very hard to stop. So you can't really jam free space optics the way that you can jam radio communications. For defense purposes, it's very clear applications.
Sure.
But also, if you're trying to set up satellite internet in Sahara, for instance, where there's very clear lines of sight to the sky, you don't have to lay billions of dollars with the fiber optic cable. You can do it off of satellites spinning in the space and then just drop down the signal. In both cases, Illyria received some non-dilutive financing really early on and then contracts with Space Force. But the main target was always, hey, let's go after commercial applications. Let's really think about how we can provide a new backbone for the internet. But yeah, the non-dilutive capital absolutely helps in terms of buying down the risk in technology and buying down the risk in business development for the other aspects of the company.
Yeah, to the government's credit, it makes great sense, especially when you see these companies take off and reach the valuations that you're describing. And whether it's those two portfolio companies or any others, would love to then hear giving any insight into trade secrets. What's your process by which you find these companies? And then once you do, would love to hear what's the process that you and your J2 goes through about making a decision of whether or not you want to invest.
Yeah, great questions. I think the first thing to understand about early stage venture is that the only way you do that is if you live on planes. The process really is going and meeting as many people as possible and really connecting in as many locations as possible. One of the interesting things about being so selective and then being very selective on the back end of who you actually invest in, you really focus only on those companies that have huge explosive potential. But one of the things that you can do when you're really confident about those bets is it leads to second and third order effects where you can choose to be more free in the time that you don't have devoted to the companies that you've selected in your portfolio. So if you have a number of really big successes like Illyria or like Aura Rings that are hitting unicorn status, it allows you to then be in some ways almost less desperate, I feel, in terms of really needing to push contracts and figure out and hustle and keep companies alive because you've done the diligence and the hard work up front rather than try and save companies in the back end that weren't a good fit for your sectors or for your customers. And so when we do this kind of approach and we start looking for companies, we take tons and tons of meetings, but we make very selective choices. We'll take 2,000 to 3,000 meetings a year as a firm and then make an investment in 8 or 10 companies. And so the down select there is extremely high because the profile that we're looking for is so narrow that it's actually very hard to match. And so it's not only the technology, it's not only the commercial TAM, it's not only the founders, which I think are classic. It's also a question of valuation, right? Because for fund economics, because we're on fund 2, we are still relatively constrained in looking for companies that have really high degrees of successes. And so when you think about combining all of those things together, it's really a small number of companies that will actually address all of those. Now, the interesting subset or secondary effect there is that because we place a lot of emphasis on that fund economics question in terms of a good deal, oftentimes we're not hunting in locations that I think are standard for venture capitalists. So do we have companies that come out of Boston or San Francisco? Absolutely. But another one of our companies that we're very proud of called Micron Biomedical, it comes out of Georgia Tech, right? So it's not your traditional VC hunting ground. And another one came out of Colorado. Mesa Quantum was another one of our recent investments. They do chip scale atomic clocks. Micron does needleless vaccine deployment. Large commercial TAMs in both cases, but not your traditional hunting ground. And what we found is that in living on plains and really hunting for these diamonds in the rough or these needles in the stack of needles, is really that you have to go into the places that most people won't. And that's where if we have partners in Boston, we have partners in San Francisco and New York, but really we're looking all over the place for those good deals.
And so once you find sources for atypical deal flow and you like the TAM, what's the emphasis that you place on the founders versus the deep tech?
That's a great question. So we look for companies that are right there on that line between science and engineering risk. So we play a lot in deep tech. We play a lot in companies that have been in place for 4 or 5 years. There's a few folks that we listen to that say, hey, you shouldn't invest in a deep company that's less than 4 years old because they need that amount of time to really stand up, do a lot of their internal research, and then determine even just the basics of product market fit, where they're going with their technology. Oftentimes it's platform stuff. And so they have this wide array of number of use cases, and really figuring out what the one makes most sense takes time. And so for us, it's a question of, okay, it's proven on the benchtop. Now, moving in to scale this, are we talking about something that you've already proven can scale, or is this a question that still needs to be determined and proven scientifically that you can reproduce it 10 times, 100 times, 1,000 times? And so once we move past that from scientific to engineering risk, then we look at simultaneously questions of founders, questions of what kind of customer interest do we have. We place a tremendous amount of effort, tremendous amount of emphasis on customer discovery, either with customers that they have brought to us or customers that we think would apply. And so we put them in front of them right away. And if there's good fit, then we know we've got a success. One of our most successful in terms of explosive growth companies out of Fund 2 is a company called Code Metal. And we ran this through, they were very early on when they first came to us about a year ago. And it's one of the first and only cases where we had 4 phone calls, and all the 4 customers said, when can I buy this product immediately? There was zero chance, zero question about whether or not there was a good product. It was just, how fast can I get this into my hands? So that, yeah.
So, yeah, it's a bit anecdotal, but
yeah,
my part of my experience has been is that you can have a great founding team, and invariably they know the product, they know the engineering inside out. Where there's an opportunity for, and help may not be the right word, for assistance, is the business side, sales and marketing, foundation, scale. Curious whether or not that's also been your experience.
Huge.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so then do you, for purposes of writing a check, do you wait till you see that's in place, or will J2 get involved if you're like, hey, I like everything else, but I'm gonna provide a lending hand here to put the business execution side in place?
Yeah. So J2, we are a high confidence fund. So if we are convinced that the company makes sense on all the different fronts that we've discussed earlier, we're all in. Internally, it takes a high bar to get across it because there has to be consensus with all of our partners. And so that's a difficult bar to reach. But once you reach it, then it's almost by definition you've hit a unicorn, right? If you can get 5 very opinionated people to agree, then that makes sense as an investment. But once you're in, we provide every facet of assistance. We recognize that for founders, oftentimes this is the first time they've done something. It's the first time they've thought about TAM, or it's the first time that they've presented to a prime to sell into the government, or it's the first time they've applied to a SBIR. But for us, it's not. And so we recognize that there's a number of things that we can assist in, and everything from marketing to providing customer introductions to often one of the more helpful things is assisting them in looking for those non-dilutive sources of capital, so SBIR and SITRs and other forms of grants and such. Those things are extremely helpful. We provide that all at once. The bar, though, to get to that point where you have the whole J2 team pulling for you, and in which we've been very successful at doing, is high. And I think that question of business is, I think, a critical one, because if we don't get the sense that there is business traction or a good, strong business, a nose for business, I don't know how to describe it. Again, very, like you said, anecdotal, then that is a kind of a line where we recognize it's not, it's oftentimes not a good idea to invest at that time. Frequently, one of the things that I have seen, anecdotally as well, is that you have a technological founder that thinks they can do it all on their own. It's the classic case, or is very much in love with their own technology and thinks that the technology will sell itself. Um, I love to give the example of Microsoft. Microsoft being a New Mexico product, nobody remembers, was never really the best product out on the market. There were plenty of other operating systems out there that were better in terms of security or customer experience or anything else. They were just the fastest and most aggressive to the market. And execution is going to beat technology, I think, most times. And so when you place a bet, particularly in the early stage where there's not a lot of commercial traction to really analyze, we weigh the business side very heavily in our deliberations.
Yeah, it's a really a fun topic. And one of the reasons I ask is for the benefit of the founders in our audience. My sense is that a lot of founders know if they're not, willing to bring on a co-founder or business consultant partner who can assist drive that part of the business. It's just an appreciation. Founder-led sales are very real. And as much as you want to focus on the product, and you still need to, depending on what the founder's expertise is, there's just no escaping it in the beginning.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. When you're a CEO or you're a founder, you're on tap for absolutely everything. And I think one of the things that I like to hear when I meet with founders, is that recognition of their own limitations, right? And the recognition of hey, it's going to take a team in order to make this happen. And I may not be the one who's going to make all the sales, but here's the person who's going to do it. And that warms my heart, because I feel that scales a lot more than one person trying to achieve absolutely everything.
Yeah, and I think it's great to hear someone in your position say that, because even if it meant you had to give up some equity, why not, if it makes the difference of having a larger pie down the road? Timing wise, this is being recorded mid-December, so it's after the presidential election. Would love to get your perspective on what a Trump administration means to your outlook for the next 4 years, and where you're maybe bullish and or bearish.
Great question. Yeah, so I am a Washington, D.C. native. So I did serve in the federal government under the first Trump administration. So I think one of the things that I personally am going to do, and I think as a firm, is maintain a wait and see attitude. There's a lot of questions around DOGE that's causing a lot of consternation around members of the federal government, and whether or not they think they're going to be employed next year, or whether there's going to be mass layoffs. There's a lot of uncertainty out there that can affect parts of the government business. There's questions about SpaceX and its relationship to Space Force and NASA and other elements. I get the sense that there's probably going to be a lot of people taking a wait and see attitude to large contracts and to other aspects of the federal government. I think that, though, while all of that may occur on the large scale budget items, the non-dilutive sources of capital that I think are the real source of strength for J2, which is this SBIR contracts or the SBIR contracts or the CRADAs and those kinds of things. I don't think that those will be touched as much, because if you look over the course of the 20th century, regardless of which party has been in power, the United States government has always invested heavily in research and early stage financing. I think that those parts will remain. And if you look at a SBIR2 contract that takes 2 years to fulfill, that takes you halfway through the Trump administration anyways. And chances of them disappearing, I think, are small, particularly when they have outsized impact on the market. So I remain bullish on that piece of the thesis. And then on the other part, where it comes to partnering for contracts and such, regardless of what happens, the fact that J2 focuses on companies with large commercial markets means that we don't have to rely as much on the federal government. And so it's one of the great joys that I have in my position. is that unlike some of my peers in defense first firms or firms that are dual purpose, so like J2, but sell primarily or invest primarily in defense companies or companies that are defense first, the freedom that I have to take a company like Code Metal or Illyria or Aura Rings and offer them as an opportunity to my friends and colleagues in the federal government rather than push them to engage in a contract because I need the revenue in order to make, the company look good is a very freeing experience. And so it allows me to engage the federal government and my ex-colleagues there in a very comfortable way. So I'm less concerned about the outlook of government spending that way. I think it's less of a pressured conversation. And the times that I do engage with the federal government, we are allowed to then come to them and say, hey, we're doing this because we've spent so much time doing diligence and building this company and helping build this company, and we're bringing you the best. And if you'd like to take it, great. If not, Best Buy is making a lot of sales of Oura Rings, and there's no that your soldiers can go and buy them at Best Buy.
Having said that, do you see any individual themes within research that are going to continue to get funding?
Yeah, great question. So I think that there's a lot of concern around renewable energies. So I spend a lot of time in the New Mexico area. J2 received investment from the State Investment Council of New Mexico and has asked me to be the representative of J2 in the state. So I've been collaborating a lot with Sandia and Los Alamos National Laboratories. There's some concern there around renewable energy research. On the other hand, it depends upon where you throw atomic research. So if you're thinking about fusion and that, there's not as much concern that there will be cuts to that, right? So there might even be plus ups to nuclear research that in some cases has been cast aside for decades. So where the research goes, I don't know. Everybody's assuming a large uptick in defense spending. It's the problem of large numbers, right? The defense budget is already so enormous. I can't imagine increasing it even more. Perhaps it might be, more productively applied, but yeah. So outside of renewable energies, I don't know if there's any other areas that I would say would be of concern to me.
If I may then offer up one, I'm not an expert by any means where they're spending money, but a theme I have heard is the impact of, say, drones in the Ukraine front, and more broadly, just autonomous vehicles.
Yeah.
Curious whether or not you've been exposed to any of those conversations and what your perspective is.
Yeah, drones are an interesting market. I looked and worked a lot with drones back in my government time. Autonomous vehicles represent, I think, a challenge and an opportunity. The challenge in that they're quite clearly something difficult to defend against, and they're quite clearly going to change and have changed the nature of warfare. But they are also challenging in that they're very low cost of entry for a company to start up and get involved in it. So the market itself has been extremely saturated. And so when J2 looks at that market, for us, it's not necessarily a great market to get into now because of that question of cost saturation and challenge to compete in when you look at against Chinese manufacturers. So the ability to create a cheap drone for just a couple $100 that is you'd be able to use as a one-way attack vehicle with all US parts, that's hard to make. That's very hard to beat. And I can wander down to your average electronics store and find a very cheap drone that will satisfy those requirements. So from a venture perspective, I don't think that fits our thesis, our particular thesis. From US government perspective, I think absolutely it makes a lot of sense to invest in and to think about. But I think it's only one piece of a larger ecosystem that needs to be addressed. So there's questions of position, navigation, and timing, so alternatives to GPS, questions of freedom of communication, alternatives to radio spectrum, companies like Illyria or the application of Illyria at the tactical level. Those I think are really important in this future warfare. So there's a lot of lessons that you can take from Ukraine, but have yet to be fully developed. Now, from a J2 perspective, which of these are actually investable, I think is a much narrower field, right? It's not to say that we don't believe in them, and we have a number of people who remain in reserve duty and about 60% of our firm is former service. But it's a question of when we're being good stewards of our LP's money, what makes most sense from an investment perspective.
And with that, it's been a great podcast. I think a whole host of tremendous insights. Before we wrap up, what counsel would you provide to founders who are listening to this and have their sights set in the brass ring, know they want to solve problems at a national scale, but could perhaps use some guidance to get on J2's radar?
One of the smartest guys that I've ever spoken with when it comes to founding companies and to real entrepreneurship at all scales is a guy named Kendall Wouter, and shout out to Kendall. And he once told me a story about he was a founder. He got into very early email marketing in the late 90s. You signed up at your dinner table, and then Chili's would send you coupons and whatever else. That was his innovation. And he once told me a story, and I hope that he's okay with me sharing this, about being so poor as a founder that he had to borrow money from his unpaid intern in order to buy groceries for his family. And the reason he shared that story with me, and that he shares it with other companies that he and I have collaborated with to talk about how to set it up and such, is to really drive home that point of, unless you're so passionate about the thing that you are building that you are willing to eat out of a dumpster and you are willing to just give everything up to your dream, think about something else. Startups are exceptionally hard. They're exceptionally draining. You have to have that passion. You have to have that drive and bring it every single day and be willing to flex and to give everything up to really achieve this dream. So when you come to J2 or when you come to any other venture firm, make sure that's what's motivating you and not necessarily the potential financial rewards, right? The financial rewards, I think, will come second to having that sort of passion and that underlying need to deliver something to the world.
Yeah, I think it's very powerful and valuable insight, because before you start a company, you just don't appreciate the roller coaster that it is to bring a company to life. And it's that passion that you need to get out of the troughs. Otherwise, you end up going, what am I doing? And that passion, I think maybe to a degree, you don't ask that question. You're just like, I just love this.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's
absolutely.
go.
Yeah, I wake up every morning extremely. We at J2 are, in a sense, also still a startup. We're a very young fund. We're 4 years in. We've raised 2 funds. We've been successful at our raise. We met our cap, and we had to turn money away for fund 2. But we wake up every day and think that. I personally will wake up, number one, ask myself, where the hell am I? And then, in terms of what hotel, what city am I in? And then once I figured that out, then, hey, I'm so excited to get started. What am I going to do today?
It's awesome. Yeri, on the subjects of SBIRs, if you can take a moment and unpack them for us, and what the significance is as it relates to a founder and them getting their product market fit.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the real beauties about SBIR contracts and SIDR contracts, SBIRs, STTRs, is that even if you take them, it does not mean that the government is your customer. You take on capital and you take on the obligation to give them back whatever the contract says. So if it's a slight adjustment to something or if it's proof, I've seen SBIRs and other non-dilutive contracts happen to just pieces of information around fusion and such. So once you've fulfilled that obligation, you are free. You no longer have to then pursue that path. And that gives you a lot of flexibility to use that time in order to get to know your customer a little bit more. So that if you choose during the course of the 2-3 years to engage in the federal government, and if the federal government is ready at the end of that 2 or 3 years to actually provide you a contract, then there's a match. But it doesn't mean that you turn yourself into a government contractor. So we have seen in pretty much all of our portfolio companies them achieve these SBIRs when they're very small, evolve, grow large commercial opportunities, and then come back to the government for the small contracts that the government may offer. And we've done some internal research, and it's challenging depending upon what you talk about in terms of SBIR, SIDRs, non-dilutive, and everything else. But we've gotten, in terms of our portfolio companies, over $2 billion worth of government contracts and SBIRs and SIDRs and non-dilutive. So we're very successful at this, but it doesn't mean that we turn all of our companies into government contract primes.
Said another way, it's almost like getting paid to learn. And having had some exposure to these types of contracts before, my sense is that the contracts can be explicit. Hey, we're the Air Force and we're looking for this. Is that always the case? Or can they be a little bit more generic to give perhaps a founder to try to make a fit, even though it may not be an exact match?
Yeah, so some SBIRs are open topic. Hey, we provide an open topic in AI. Please provide your submission, and off to the races you go. And even the ones that are very specific, we encourage founders to invest the time anyways to apply. The average, we did an analysis, and it's about 100 hours to submit one of these, and it's about a 1 in 34 chance that you get one. And if you break down the math and such, it's something astronomical, like $500 or $1,000 an hour that you get paid for. You get paid if you actually win. And so if I told you that you have a 1 in 34 chance to get paid $1,000 an hour, and that most of the work, even if you fail, can be reapplied to the next application because it's pretty much the same thing, that's a winning proposition. And even if you have a technology that is roughly aligned and you think so, apply, and it's going to be a good learning experience regardless.
I was about to say, if there isn't an entrepreneur who hasn't already started buying a piece of the software that can help bring that.
Oh, there's lots. There's lots. Yeah. Yeah, we saw an explosion of those companies come out of the LLM boom in 22, 23.
Interesting. Yeah, $1,000 an hour, that's real money, especially when you're getting started. If you can gain market intelligence by getting someone who, they may not be a customer, but you're still going to learn. That's invaluable.
I will say one piece of advice for the listeners is that if you do find a professional SBIR writer, they're oftentimes worth their money, but make sure that they have incentives that are aligned with you. So if you're going to go contract with someone, even if it's just a door opener or someone who's got federal practice, make sure that they're operating at least in part on success fees, so they're incentivized to then hustle for you, and not just collect a fee month to month. There's lots of folks out there that will I would love to get paid $5,000 per company to make introductions, right? But if it's $1,000 a month and 10% of any proceeds, that's actually going to net out to be a better deal for the companies, I think.
I think it's great advice. Time is so precious, and capital as well. So if you can increase the odds of getting a hit because you find a consultant who's going to be invested, brilliant. Yeri, I appreciate your time. If there are any founders, co-investors, or LPs that want to get a hold of you, how can they find you?
Yeri, so it's YERI at j2vp.com. Please reach out, and I'd love to talk.
Fantastic. Everyone, Yeri Lopez, Director of Partnerships at J2 Ventures. Yeri, really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Kristian Marquez here. Thank you so much for listening to the Innovators and Investors Podcast. If you're a successful founder or an investor who would like to be on the podcast, please visit podcast.finstratmgmt.com/podcast-guest. If you've got something out of this interview, please share this episode on social media. If you know someone that would be a great guest, please tag them on social media to let them know about the show and include the hashtag Innovators and Investors. I'd love to see your posts and suggestions. We're regularly putting out new episodes and content. To make sure you catch each new episode, please subscribe to the Innovators and Investors Podcast. And your thumbs up, ratings, and reviews go a long way to help promote the show, and it means a lot to me and my team. Would you like to know more? Go to our website, finstratmgmt.com, or follow us on LinkedIn or on X. Our handle is @finstratmgmt. This is Kristian Marquez. Thank you for listening. Until next time.